Hello, Player One. Welcome to the Gaming History Club. My name is Gabby.
Hello, and I'm JP. Get ready to have your cartridge blown in this episode as we delve into what games get stored in. So, Player One, there's a multitude of ways that we can get our games in, what format they're in. To be honest, at first we were going to call the episode Physical Formats, but then it turns out that's actually more of like a music term, like cassette and vinyl and CDs.
Yeah.
That's not really video game lingo. It's actually storage mediums.
Yeah, although what we're talking about is actually about the physical format of how you store your games.
Yes, yeah. I mean, physical format sounds just a lot better. It's more fun to say, really, than storage mediums. But, storage mediums it is, yeah.
Exactly. So there are four main types of how we store games.
Yeah. There's four types.
First one is paper, not literally like typing or writing down your code on a piece of paper. No. Although, we'll get into that later,
We'll get into
basically.
That. But paper was a thing. Paper, yeah.
Paper was the thing, exactly.
Yeah, paper tape, paper punch cards.
Yeah.
Yeah, That was a thing, believe it or not. And we're going to be talking about it.
And the second one is chip.
That's right. So our good old ROMs, our read-only memories, cartridges, but also memory cards. But we're thinking more along the lines of like Nintendo DS, kind of memory cards. We're not talking about like the PlayStation memory card because that just saved your games. There was no games on the memory card. Yeah. There's also magnetic forms. So that would be our diskettes, our hard disk drives, cassette tapes. And lastly, we have optical discs, laser-written CDs. But we will be focusing more along the lines of, I would say, home console. So we're going to talk about all of them a little bit briefly, but for the sake of the length of this episode, we're definitely going to have to ditch a few topics here. Mostly, unfortunately, I think with computers, because the PC world was just its own kettle of fish. It had all kinds of things going on.
That's true. I'm actually interested. You said diskette before instead of floppy.
That's right.
Yeah, which is interesting because I think that's IBM terms, I believe.
Is it?
Yeah.
Wow.
I know, but it caught on. So that's why people call it diskette as well everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Anyway, so let's get into the first one that we want to talk about today, which is paper.
Exciting.
Yeah, so before we had cheap storage media or access to the internet, networks, or even before video games, we already had paper.
We did have paper, lots of it.
Yeah.
Too much of it, actually.
I would be surprised if paper comes after video games.
I wonder how many Player Ones knew that paper was going to be mentioned in this episode.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, let us know if you thought about paper when you saw the episode coming out. So early computer users realized they could use paper tape to record data or programs by punching rows of holes into tape. The tape contained holes aligned by rows and channels or columns. The first tapes had 5 channels, allowing for up to 32 different characters to be input into the computer per data row. So the reading speeds back then seemed to be between 1,000 to 2,000 characters per second, providing a reliable speed before issues may occur with the tape machines if you do it too quickly.
That's right, yeah.
But during the Second World War, British codebreakers designed a computer called Colossus that was able to reliably read up to 5,000 characters per second. That's about 27 miles per hour or 43 kilometers per hour.
That is so fast. Imagine that paper traveling through that machine at that speed in front of your eyes. You're just like, wow.
Wow, that was fast.
And that was the reliable speed. I read that like how they came to 5,000, how they settled on it was they took the max speed, which was like, so it's 5,000 characters per second. It's reliable. They did upwards of 9,000, and then at that point the paper would literally like disintegrate, just like, go up into flames. It's too quick. I mean, it's like over 50 miles per hour flying through a machine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they just basically cut that in half, and that was thought of as like, well, reliable then.
And safer and probably more sustainable.
Yeah.
That speed, right? So, yeah, that's really interesting because it could have actually done almost double, but it chose not to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess it's not like a really, really long history of paper as storage medium. I mean, once computers really kick off, like we kind of, technologically kind of advanced quite quickly then in terms of storage and processing speed and what have you. So it wasn't like for a really long time.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a part of history there where paper was what programs were stored on, never mind just games, but actual programs, yeah?
Yeah, but you know what? The size of the games and programs were naturally small as computer storage and processing power was also in its infancy at that point, right? If you remember, we talked about Maze, the first 3D first person game.
Oh, I definitely remember Maze.
Yeah,
Oh,
it
yeah.
had so many firsts, right? I mean, level editors, avatars, observer mode, radar, Maze. We talked about Maze back in the
2D to 3D.
yes, 2D to 3D.
One of the first
exactly.
3D games. One of the two contestants for the title of first 3D video game. It was
Yeah.
either Maze or Spacem, right?
Yeah, so Maze was the one developed by 3 high school students visiting a NASA research lab, and they created Maze on the IMLAC PDS-1 mini computer.
Which was huge.
Not mini
It wasn't many.
whatsoever.
It was really big, guys. But yeah.
Right, so why I brought up about Maze, one of the trio, Greg Thompson, when he successfully enrolled at MIT in 1973, he took paper tapes of the game Maze with him to bring to MIT, where it would continue to be developed.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. So that's one example of how paper tape was used. There's a lot more to paper tape actually as a storage medium. So the source code of the game could also be printed and stored in books or magazines as humanly readable text, right? So this text could then painstakingly be typed into another computer by someone to basically copy the program by hand.
Imagine how many typos you would have.
Yeah, and that was a big part of the problem, apparently. Like text editor and finding like typos, apparently that caused massive headaches, yeah.
I could imagine.
Yeah. So apparently this was sometimes referred to as paperware, but I saw that in an article, but if you like look for paperware these days, this is not something you would find. But apparently this was called paperware. So another example of how paper was used, drawing back from one of our previous episodes, when Will Crowther created one of the first text-based adventure games and ancestor to the future adventure game genre as a whole, including point-and-click games, back in 1975. He did so by using a teleprinter terminal at his home that was connected to his work's mainframe computer at BBN. So yeah, a teleprinter. So this is a printer with a keyboard. Yeah, so he would type in like, go north, and then the teleprinter would print like, what happens when you go north? Like you've entered a cave, what have you. Yeah, so another big, massive part of how paper was actually used in video games. Video games, digital screen video games, paper, crazy.
I know. It's impressive.
Yeah, but of course it wasn't always going to be paper for very long. Now, let's see what was going on with the home console. So, we are going to fly by the OG home console here, unfortunately. Sorry, Magnavox Odyssey, but your quote-unquote game cards, they were just printed out circuit boards that modified the circuitry of the console to make two player-controlled dots displayed on a TV behave differently. So we've touched upon the Magnavox Odyssey in quite a lot of detail in the Birth of the Home Console episode.
Yeah.
But if you just need a quick refresher, Player One, it's a home console that will make you able to navigate 2 pixels on the screen, and that is about it. So we're going to fly past this one. The games were not on those, what the Odyssey would call game cards. They were not on those game cards. It was just changing the internals of the console, okay? So the early 70s computing technology was very expensive. To make video games a commercially viable product, technology a few years older was used to ensure manufacturing costs and selling price actually made sense.
Yeah, either one had the fortune of being in an environment or part of a group with access to a terminal run by incredibly expensive mainframe computers at universities, for example, or research labs, where video games had their own underground scene.
Yeah, so Stanford, MIT, NASA research labs, those kind of places with
Yeah.
big expensive equipment.
On the other hand, though, during that time, commercial video games used slightly older, cheaper technology to provide a reasonable price to buyers and consumers. For example, Atari's earliest arcade games, Pong,
Yeah.
first home console, Magnavox Odyssey, or Nintendo used this mantra while working on the Game Boy, lateral thinking with their technology.
With these three past examples, which we have made episodes on, if you have listened to them, you will remember a big part of their story is how do we make this cheap enough to create, develop, and sell? Yeah, that was a massive part of their journeys to make these games happen.
Yeah, that's true because video games were not made with cutting edge technology at the time. It was just simply too expensive for anyone to buy a computer or console with that much power, with the available power. So let's talk a little bit about microprocessor.
Yes. Woohoo.
Yay! The first commercially available microprocessor was released in 1971 by none other than Intel.
Of course.
Yeah, it was called the 4004. Should I call that 4004, 4004?
Or 4004 or
4004?
4004.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it was called back then, but I'm gonna refer it as 4004, just for consistency.
Yeah.
So at the time, 4004 was costing $60, or adjusted to inflation, that's 450 US dollar today. Expensive, yes.
Yeah, and see, so that's 1971. So if you wanted to use this to make video games with, your console already costs $450. And that is, well, in today's money, and that is without adding anything else to it.
Yeah,
You
just the processor.
You see the problem that they have, yeah?
So the 4004 was a pivotal chip that would start the fourth generation of computer hardware, which remains our current generation to this day still. It was followed by the 8008 the next year in 72. The same year we see Pong and Magnavox Odyssey started to hit the arcade and homes. In 1974, so 2 years after that, Intel released the 8080. With each iteration, the microprocessor saw dramatic jumps in capability. The 8080 chip was pivotal and influenced computers and computer companies in many ways. It's generally considered the first truly usable microprocessor and powered some of the first personal computers. Other companies tried to replicate Intel's success by developing their own microprocessor, including Fairchild.
Yeah, that's right. And I always get a little bit excited talking about Fairchild. So it was during these circumstances that Wallace Kirshner and Lawrence Haskell and Jerry Lawson started development of their Fairchild Channel F home video console starting in 1974. Channel F, by the way, stands for Channel Fun.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah. At first they were going to call it the Video Entertainment System, but they kind of thought, no, we'll go with Channel F. Originally developed for the use with the Intel 8080, Jerry Lawson redesigned the console to use with Fairchild's own F8 CPU. Jerry, by the way, was also part of the Homebrew Computer Club, an influential club from California with high-profile members including Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, the founders of Apple, of course. As games were being developed for the console, it made sense for the trio to think of a way to change games in an inexpensive way, while using only one relatively expensive computerized console at the heart of the system. That way the player would only buy one expensive part once and reuse it with a variety of games. very similar to what we do these days.
Yeah.
Still. The Channel F was released in 1976 and was the first console to have interchangeable ROM cartridges. It freed games to exist only within the home console to becoming their own separate physical objects.
Yeah, but the Channel F, with that kind of technology, they retailed at a high price of 170 US dollar at that time, which would be 910 US dollar today. Can you imagine buying a console for that price?
I mean, no. I mean, for the right console, yes, but man, I would have to have a lot of reasons to buy that console, yeah.
That is quite a steep price.
Yeah.
Yeah. Games priced at 20 US dollar at that time, which is around 91 US dollar today. To be fair, that's not too far from games nowadays. So, yeah.
That's true.
And the cartridges were named video cards. 2 games came integrated into the console, tennis and hockey. So that's another Pong clones, basically. And 27 video cards were made. Sometimes more than one game was on a video card. The console sold around 350,000 units overall. It's largely overshadowed by the booming success of the Atari 2600, even though Atari was released a year later.
Yeah, that's right. So Atari would have a lot more of the action games, apparently, compared to the Fairchild Channel F. I mean, there was only 27 video cards anyway, but then some of them were like mathematical, kind of education games sometimes. And then Atari had all the fun stuff, basically.
Would you buy the console to learn math, or do you want a console to play Space Invader? I mean, come on.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have that problem these days. You know, you can have both. You can play Assassin's Creed, have fun, doing some free running and also learn a little bit about ancient Egypt at the same time. So
Yeah.
we've come a far way. We've come a far way.
We have.
Though mostly associated with video games, ROM cartridges had already been made previously since the early 70s, most commonly used as modules that could be plugged into calculators to expand the amount of mathematical functions that calculator could perform. So these were seen in Texas Instruments TI-59 family, for example, and also some Hewlett-Packard calculators. But when the development team of the Channel F was asked during an interview, they said they weren't aware of such modules, and so it doesn't appear that those ROM cartridges actually inspired the development of the Fairchild Channel F. ROM cartridges were the dominant video game storage media from the 70s up until the mid to late 90s, so they went a long time to be the status quo for how to get your games. They were used in around 50 different consoles, and each one was also unique in terms of like the layout, exactly what the cartridge looks like, right? Since they connected directly to the console hardware, there was very, very little loading time. And to be honest, like most people will probably say there was no loading times because it's obviously so instant, like it feels instant, yeah. Obviously, there is a little bit of loading technically going on, but it might as well be non-existent.
No.
ROM cartridges are the only storage medium that can easily incorporate additional hardware that was not part of the game's original design. So, for example, the game cartridge for the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive game Micro Machines 2 used a custom design that added 2 extra controller ports to enable 4-player gaming. Cool, huh?
Yeah, that's amazing, actually.
Yeah, so the Sega had 2, and then if you plug this card in, there's 2 extra controller ports in the video game cartridge. Wow. A more important hardware extension to game cartridges was introduced during the 8-bit generation of video game consoles. So again, we're talking about the NES or Sega Genesis and Mega Drive, and they did this by adding a tiny battery into the game cartridge, and now games could be saved as well.
Ooh.
Yeah, and this is the only medium that can do this, very easily incorporate extra hardware. Due to the unique format each console used, it was also very difficult to pirate video games for home consoles.
Yes, and ROM were also relatively tough compared to when CDs would eventually take the lead, as most used storage mediums for video games. So much so that many players back in the day cared very little for the packaging and extra instruction manual that would come with the games.
Yeah, what a fatal flaw, yeah. If you could just go back in time and tell yourself, don't throw that away. That's gonna be so much money.
I know.
It's gonna be worth so much if you keep that in good condition.
I know, that's true. You would have had so many of them, and we could have been a collector. Oh, God.
I'm sure you can even make a decent amount of money just by selling the boxing and the instruction manual to people who have the game but threw it away back in the day.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's true. That's priceless collection, that.
Not priceless, just very expensive.
Priceful collection, that.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. They also had their fair share of drawbacks, though. They were quite expensive to make compared to other storage mediums, costing a lot to produce as well. ROM cartridges also had very small capacity compared to other mediums. The capacity for a Channel F video card, for example, was 4 kilobyte. That's 4,000 ASCII characters. Diskettes, or floppy, on the other hand, were already pushing 2 megabytes in comparison. This is so funny if you talk about it nowadays, right?
Yeah.
Pushing 2 megabytes in comparison.
4 kilobytes, I mean, yeah, especially when you think of it in terms of those are 4,000 characters.
Yeah.
Like, A, B, C, like the alphanumerical characters, 4,000 of them. That's all that video card had in order to make a video game happen on the console, yeah?
Yeah.
Wow.
And yeah, when Nintendo 64 was released 20 years later, to compare it, the last major console to use cartridges, the maximum capacity on the cartridge was 64 megabyte.
Yeah.
Another disadvantage was because ROMs directly connect to the hardware of the console, you wouldn't be able to release a game on more than one cartridge. A game was constrained to one cartridge only, unlike PC or later PS1 games where you could eject CD1 and then insert CD2 to continue.
That's right.
So, yeah, unfortunately, you only have one cartridge per game. ROM cartridges would remain popular for much longer outside of home consoles, especially for Nintendo and handheld consoles, using memory cards, which are very similar to ROM cartridges in principle, however, much smaller in size.
Yeah. They look like SD cards, basically, right?
Exactly. Yeah. By the way, don't actually blow into your game cartridges, although it seems like a popular pastime belief for players of certain age.
It's a good party trick for a certain younger audience.
Well,
Look, I can make this old machine work by blowing into the cartridges. Man, our kids are gonna make fun of us hard one day, yeah? Like, this is what you had to do to play video games? You had to blow into the cartridge?
this is how you rewind a cassette tape
Yeah.
with using pencil. Anyway, let's not reveal our age by talking about past life, right?
Do not blow into your cartridge.
Do not
blow into your cartridge, no.
Because the small amount of spit in your breath will eventually damage the cartridges. Maybe use a nice Q-tip swab instead. That would be better.
Yeah, just gently get that dust out there.
Yes, exactly. So now let's get into 5th generation stuff. 5th gen stuff.
Yeah.
As mentioned previously, the ROM cartridge format was dominant from the 70s until mid-90s. Game developers became hungry for more storage to use for making video games because they needed to incorporate high-quality audio, speech, and especially the rise of full 3D graphics.
Yeah, they were getting hungry to put this stuff in their video games, especially with the PC side. They were having this kind of stuff already, full motion video, narrators, full speech for characters. And yeah, why should the home console not have such nice things, right?
Yeah, and perhaps the most dramatic shift in home video game consoles came during the 5th generation of consoles itself, dominated by Nintendo 64 and PlayStation 1. You can see the difference when those two consoles came out compared to what was available during that time. Massively. While the most successful console of the generation, PlayStation 1, used CDs, holding a respectable 700 megabyte, it came as somewhat a shock that Nintendo chose to stick to the cartridge format.
Yeah, that's right. But it wasn't for lack of trying, to be honest. So Nintendo did approach the two companies that did develop the CD format, which was Sony and Philips. So they first attempted to work together with Sony, and that was to create a CD add-on for the Super Nintendo. Um, and they were going to call this the Nintendo PlayStation, which that feels so weird to say. The Nintendo PlayStation. It's like you're in a Rick and Morty episode in a different parallel dimension now or something, like the
Yeah,
Nintendo PlayStation. It never came to be, and somewhat scandalously, Nintendo decided to ditch Sony, paranoid that Sony were trying to muscle their way into the video game market. I mean, fair enough, I understand why they were suspicious. I mean, this is definitely what Sony was trying to do, clearly.
and they did anyway.
In hindsight, yeah.
Yeah.
But they did this like a day after they revealed, I think, the idea in like a consumer show. Like a day after they were like, yeah, we're not working with Sony anymore. Then, oof, yeah.
That's pretty tough.
Yeah, so then Nintendo would go to the other CD developer, which was Philips, and they also tried to create a CD add-on, but that project too wouldn't come to be. But there was already some legalities set in place here, and so this left Philips with the trademarks to make some games for their own console, the Philips CDI, which was going to be a bit of like a multimedia kind of system. So yeah, you could play games on it, but then also maybe some videos using the CDI format. So they made some really bad Nintendo games. They made like Hotel Mario, and they also made some infamous Zelda games with really cringy cutscenes, which you may have very well seen already.
Yeah, that's true.
So Nintendo decided to once again roll with the cartridges. Looking at the differences between the N64 and PlayStation 1 really reflects the advantages and disadvantages of both. So the N64 had very, very fast loading times, almost non-existent. The PlayStation 1 had really infamously, notoriously long loading screens.
Oh God, yeah.
Very long. But the PlayStation games could be more than 10 times the size of Nintendo 64 games. Also, a Nintendo 64 cartridge cost $30 to manufacture. A PlayStation CD, just $1. And that includes the case that the CD comes in. Yeah.
Oh God,
Yeah.
that's a lot cheaper.
Yeah. The slot for a cartridge, though, so like on the N64 console, you need something to put the cartridge inside of, right? So that part was cheaper than a CD drive because it was older technology, right? So the console manufacturing cost itself was actually cheaper for Nintendo. And this is what actually caused many game developers to move on from Nintendo and jump ship to PlayStation, a brand new kid in the video game market, yeah? Partly believing that Nintendo's decision to go with cartridges was just an excuse to charge higher licensing fees.
Because it's more difficult to pirate, it's more difficult to copy, basically.
That's it, yeah. The Final Fantasy series most prominently ditched Nintendo in favor for Sony. And I'm sure that was like, not an easy decision for many game developers because PlayStation was the unproven kid on the block.
Yeah.
Yeah. Following the fifth generation, almost every console hereafter would come with an optical drive in favor of ROM cartridges. The optical formats united games among platforms, with the PC and home consoles on the same storage medium now, with similar capabilities and specifications, games being released on all platforms are seen more often now.
Yeah, and thank God for that.
Yeah, no, you don't want to be kind of, kept away from playing certain games because of the console you're on, because it just means you have to get more consoles, right? You do want a pretty big library, really, yeah.
Exactly. Even games nowadays that's very console specific,
Yeah.
it always a little bit.
I think in the ideal
Annoying.
world, it's like you want, so if Nintendo make games just for their own console, that's okay. But a third-party developer, it would be nice if they just make it for every platform, if reasonable. I mean, because, yeah, these teams also, need to be paid and they got work to do and have a finite supply of resources, yeah. But if possible, make games for all the platforms, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That would be a lot friendlier for the consumer, right?
Yeah.
So, another optical format that definitely deserves a shout out to is Laserdisc. In many ways, way ahead of its time. It was released back in 1978 and it's an ancestor to the CD, DVD, and Blu rays that would come much later. However, Laserdiscs were not fully digital, they were actually analog video signals.
Yeah.
Arcade games have been made using this format with games like Dragon Slayer from 1983, giving players a truly detailed cartoon movie like experience, completing QTEs, QuickTime events.
Yeah. It's quite astounding. And again, it shows the different formats' advantages and disadvantages. Laserdisc, super expensive, way ahead of its time. But you get like really cool cartoon, detailed, full color stuff happening in your games. Yeah.
Feels like watching a Disney movie.
Yeah, definitely does. Dragon Slayer actually used one of the Disney artists, so not far there at all. So what does the future hold? Will physical storage mediums become extinct? Well, console versions now, the current generation PS5 and Xbox Series S, are available without any way of playing physical versions of your games. Instead, they need to be paid for and downloaded online. And you can combine that with the ever more popular subscription-based services happening everywhere in our lives. So we're looking at Uber, Amazon Prime, Netflix, Spotify. We also have these for games, PlayStation Network, etc., where you don't need to go into a store really. You don't even need to pay for one game anymore. You can pay, $10, $20 per month for a certain library of games. So we wonder if physical storage mediums will prevail. Or will they be fully replaced in future? Well, I certainly hope not, but it could very well be.
Yeah, because I feel like there is a little bit of novelty when you collect physical format of games, and there's something heartwarming about that, definitely.
So I think the gaming community is pretty strong with things it doesn't like. So a lot of the, kind of like pay-to-play stuff that's going on in games, or the loot boxes, right? And stuff like that. And there's quite a big push against having that kind of stuff, microtransactions. But you will eventually wear out all the old gamers. They're going to be replaced by people who are just used to this current atmosphere, and slowly, bit by bit, you will actually make it happen where there is no physical format. If you want the game, you got to download, and that's just the way it is. In the PC market, it already is that way. You cannot buy Cyberpunk 2077 or Starfield as a Blu-ray because, well, computers don't even come with Blu-ray players by default anyway. So how are you gonna, you know what I mean? So, yeah.
Yeah, it's really different nowadays how you play games, how you get the games itself.
If you ever felt like collecting video games, probably best to start now. Player one. Start now, or it will get more expensive in future.
Yeah.
So, thank you for joining us on this trip from medium to medium. Let us know if you want to also hear the eclectic evolution of video game storage mediums for PC.
Yeah, please do let us know by dropping us a message on our website, gaminghistory.club. New episodes of Gaming History Club are released every second Wednesday, so make sure you subscribe and follow us on our social media. We're on Instagram and Facebook as Gaming History Club.
Come back in a couple of weeks where we take off and learn to fly. See ya.